Today, we still have very serious civil rights issues to deal with, including the two that I just mentioned. I think adults have the right to govern their lives as long as they're consenting adults and not imposing their will on others. That is a civil rights issue. Today, we still have problems of institutional bias. The notion that all of our differences, be it racial or based on gender, all of a sudden, by some magic, disappeared the night of November 4th, 2008, is absurd on its face. We won the right to change. We did not win the change that night. We won the right to go to the White House and to have the majority of the Senate and the Congress. But the work is yet to be done. There is quite a difference between having the dream team on the court and in winning the game. You still have to score in order to win the game. Dream teams can be defeated, which is why I raised what I did earlier about the watering down by some Democrats of key facets of President Obama's economic stimulus bill. So tonight, as we meet, there will be those that say, well, race is no longer a factor in America. Well, the fact of the matter is that tonight, if a black child, a Latino child, and a white child is born at this moment in a maternity ward in America, they will still likely face different quality of life. The black child is 3 times more likely to go to jail charged with the same crime as the white child, according to the Department of Justice under George Bush. The black child is likely to have a third less educational opportunities and quality education if they go to public schools, and they're more likely to be turned down for a bank loan at 4 times the rate to 3 times the rate in the last 3 years. Now, that's, of course, before the banks went broke, and now everybody would be turned down, so we do have equality there. The fact is that the fight for civil rights was not just to break the ceilings at the top, and I don't minimize the significance of that, nor do I minimize the fact that it is a monumental achievement that all of us find great pride in. But the end of the civil rights journey is to create equality from the bottom up, not just breakthrough at the top. I was asked earlier tonight by one of the students, what was my reaction the night that President Obama won? And I know President Obama for several years. He and I understand each other's roles. I went around the country campaigning. I was very happy the night he won. I was at the grave of Martin Luther King with his children. We led a very large, about 5,000 people, to the watch night service there to watch the election results. And the president that asked me the question tonight said we saw some of the civil rights leaders crying. I said, I understand that. I grew up under many of them. Reverend Jesse Jackson mentored me, who's just about a generation ahead of me. When I was growing up, though, I had seen blacks in bigger positions than he did. Reverend Jackson, Reverend Lowry, that generation grew up sitting in the back of the bus drinking from colored water fountains. I grew up in Brooklyn some 15, 20 years later. I never saw the back of a bus. I'd never drunk from a colored water fountain. In fact, when I was 12 years old, Ed Brooke was elected to the U.S. Senate by mostly white votes in Massachusetts. So I was not one that didn't believe a black could one day be elected president. I did not know it would happen now, but I never grew up feeling that we could not break that ceiling. What did occur to me was how if we had kept moving forward, that most Americans would get beyond whatever personal biases they may have had or may not have had and vote their interests and the interests of the country. And I think that's what happened on November 4th. I think Barack Obama was the perfect instrument at the perfect time to bring this country forward. But I think that we do that victory and him a disservice to act as if now all of the problems are solved and we can sit back and watch him deliver us rather than help him continue the mandate that the American people have given him. and that is to close the gaps that exist racially and with gender and with sexual lives. One of the first things he did, in fact, was to sign legislation to deal with the gender gap in employment, showing that he himself recognizes that it is still something that we must legislatively respond to, the inequalities in this country. And he had the activist young lady that led the fight and fought the fight against gender inequality standing there as he signed a bill that had been committed to her name. I think that there are those that now deny that we no longer have gender bias, we no longer have racial bias. It is very interesting that they are the same ones that told us before this day that there was no gender bias and race bias. So now they've announced the end of something that they never admitted that ever was in the first place. So let me get this right. Fox News, to be specific, now announces we're beyond race when they said we never had a racial problem in the first place. So how does my good friend Sean Hannity preach the funeral of a body that he said was never born? It is interesting to me, all of the post-racial analysts, well, when did they ever admit there was ever racism in America? So how could we be post something that never existed? Obviously, they never wanted to deal with the problems of race, the problem of gender, the problem of sex in this country, and their way of dealing with it was to act as if we are just making it up and that people just fabricate or hallucinate these situations. Just like poor people asking for government help were beggars and were all kinds of irresponsible welfare queens. But if you're a major corporation and a billionaire and you want government help, you're a bailout applicant. So if you're a single mother with 3 kids and you can't make ends meet and can't find a job and you apply for government aid, beggar. If you're a multi-millionaire, maybe even billionaire with a private jet and 3 homes, and you cook the books and everybody is now going broke and you apply for government help, you're a bailout applicant. Maybe what we should do is take all of the poor people and have them apply for bailout. And maybe people could then see their needs a little better. I watched today with amazement as some of the leading bankers sat in front of the Congress with such vague and nebulous responses to how they spent $350 billion of government money. Can you imagine if poor people went to their welfare investigator without their receipts and without their records, and they don't even have one of these highfalutin accounting firms, but they supposed to account for every dime. But here are bankers trained in finance with big accounting firms and all kinds of staffs that have summer homes and winter homes, even get their stuff together in, that couldn't find the details of what they did with government bailout money. But of course, my good friend Mr. Hannity would say that I am burdening them to ask them to account for money, but that it is a responsible thing for poor people not to ask for the government to ever help them. Or for that matter, students that end up going to some colleges and 50 years old before they can pay off the student loans. Certainly, they should not get any assistance to help them get a quality education in America because they're just begging. Certainly, we can lend money to major corporations at 1% interest while we charge students 5 and 6% interest on student loans. And if someone like me says, why don't we give students the same interest that we give major corporations, then I'm some socialist leaning toward communist rather than someone that just might want to see young Americans afford the education that we promised them that as a country we want them to have. It's very interesting times when we can see in the educational area that even George Bush raises a question of education reform, something I agree with, but I certainly don't agree with the way they approached it. And he names his program Leave No Child Behind, but left the money behind. Didn't even fund the program that he initiated. And we have the argument, as President Obama referred to the other night, of those that want to put no money in public education, and the argument on the other side of those that want to put no restraints and no way of gauging the success of education to our inner city young people. So as I said, there are still battles that have to be fought. There's still gaps that have to be fought. There are still civil rights issues, from the criminal justice system to finance to education, and clearly there are stark examples of the inequity that still remain in the health area. If you look at the 9 worst diseases in America, African Americans are number 1. That corresponds with health services are not equally distributed, even through public sector dollars. So we must fight until we have an equality that every child born in this country, whether they are black, white, Asian, Latino, or Native American, have the same equal protection under the law and the same opportunity.